The ballroom of Cresthaven Manor was full of light and noise on the night everything changed. Hundreds of guests moved through the grand hall in their finest clothes. Crystal glasses caught the glow of the chandeliers above. Servers moved quietly between the crowds carrying trays of food and drink. Soft music filled the air. On the surface, it looked like the most elegant evening anyone could attend. But Nadia Aurel was not there to enjoy the evening. She stood near the far wall with her back straight and her eyes moving. She was 31 years old, with dark hair pulled back and a simple navy dress that made her look like just another guest. But she was not a guest. She was a hired member of the event's security team, brought in just 3 days before the gala through a private firm based in Vienna. Her paperwork was clean, her certifications were in order, and her references checked out without a single problem. Nobody questioned her. Nobody looked twice. That was exactly how she preferred it. The man she was there to protect was Adrian Voss. In business circles, some people called him the Alpha King, though never to his face. He had built one of the most powerful private defense and security companies in the world after leaving the military nearly 15 years earlier. He was tall, confident, and used to being the most important person in any room. That evening, he stood near the center of the ballroom surrounded by delegates and businessmen from several countries, laughing at something a Belgian official had just said. Nadia watched him from a distance. She also watched everything else. At exactly 10:47 in the evening, the kitchen corridor door on the far left side of the room opened, and a man stepped through it. He was wearing a white catering uniform and carrying a small tray. He walked slowly, calmly, as if he belonged there completely. Nobody paid attention to him. There were dozens of servers moving through the room at that moment. But Nadia stopped breathing for half a second. She had seen that walk before. She knew it the way a person knows a childhood song, not because she was thinking about it, but because her body recognized it before her mind could form the words. The careful steps, the slightly lowered chin, the way his eyes moved across the room in a straight line, rather than wandering the way a server's eyes would. He was not looking for tables to serve. He was looking for a target. She did not reach for her earpiece. She did not call out to the other guards posted at the doors. She did not run. She simply began walking, steady, unhurried, cutting through the crowd at an angle that would bring her between the man in the catering uniform and Adrian Voss before either of them could close the distance. 11 seconds. That was all the time there was. The man reached beneath his tray. Nadia reached him first. She caught his right wrist with both hands and turned it sharply, redirecting the force of his arm away from his body. The tray hit the floor. A few nearby guests startled and stepped back. Nadia kept moving, pressing the man forward until he was face first against the marble column beside the bar. She held him there with her knee planted and her grip locked. The concealed blade he had been carrying fell and slid across the polished floor. 2 other security officers arrived 4 seconds later. They took the man off her hands. Nadia stepped back, smoothed the front of her dress, and looked toward Adrian Voss, who had turned around at the sound of the commotion. He stood very still, his glass still in his hand, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. The room recovered quickly. The music started again within a minute. Most of the guests had no clear idea what had happened. A few people near the bar murmured to each other about a clumsy server. Within the hour, the evening continued almost as if nothing had occurred at all. But in a private room off the east wing of the manor, things were very different. Detective Leanne Harrow had arrived within 30 minutes of the incident. She was experienced, direct, and not easily impressed. She sat across from Nadia at a plain table and opened her notebook. The room smelled like old carpet and the faint traces of someone's cold coffee. 2 of Adrian Voss's lawyers stood near the door. The detective looked at Nadia for a long moment before she spoke. "How did you know?" she asked. Nadia kept her hands folded on the table. "I noticed something unusual about the way he was moving," she said. "I responded to what I observed." Detective Harrow nodded slowly. "The man you stopped tonight has been operating under 4 different names across 3 countries. His face has never appeared in any public security database. Interpol had very limited information on him. He is not someone a private security contractor would recognize from a briefing file." She paused. "So I will ask you again. How did you know?" Nadia's expression did not change. "I saw what I saw," she said quietly. "I did what I was trained to do." She said nothing more. The detective pressed her for another 40 minutes. She asked the question from different angles, in different ways. She was patient and professional. But Nadia's answer remained the same, calm, polite, and completely unmovable. She did not become nervous. She did not stumble over her words. She simply sat there, steady as a stone, and gave nothing away. When the session ended, and Nadia was allowed to leave, Detective Harrow sat alone in the small room for a while. She stared at her notebook. She had written very little. The man who had been stopped that evening was identified through a lengthy international process over the following weeks. His name was Gregor Stein, and he had once been part of a covert intelligence cell that had been officially shut down years earlier. He was a professional, careful, and experienced, and the people who had sent him after Adrian Voss had chosen him for exactly those reasons. Investigators who worked the case in the weeks following the gala began pulling apart Nadia's background with great care. Everything they found on paper was clean. She had worked in private security for 9 years, first in Bratislava, then in Vienna. She had solid training records and a list of reputable employers. Her mother, a retired schoolteacher in Bratislava, confirmed that her daughter had been in this line of work for years and had always been serious and dedicated. But two things did not fit. The first was the technique Nadia had used to stop Gregor Stein. A forensic analyst who reviewed the security footage from the gala, frame by careful frame, noted that the movement she had performed was not something taught in standard private security training programs. The wrist control, the angle of redirection, and the way she had managed his body weight against the column were consistent with a very specific and uncommon combat system. It was the kind of training associated with a small number of intelligence organizations. Not private firms, not corporate security teams, intelligence organizations. The second was a phone record. 6 weeks before the gala, a call had been received on Nadia's personal mobile phone. The call had lasted exactly 14 seconds. The number it came from traced back to a communications relay in Minsk, the same relay that Gregor Stein's former intelligence cell had been known to use for passing signals between operatives. Nadia had not made the call. She had received it. She had never reported it to anyone. When investigators brought this information to her attention in a follow-up interview, her response was exactly what it had been before. She listened. She was respectful. She said that she could not comment on communications she may or may not have received, and that she had acted in good faith on the night of the event. She did not appear frightened. She did not appear guilty. She appeared like someone who had decided, a long time ago, exactly how much she was willing to say, and exactly where that line would be, and who had no intention of crossing it. There was a moment during that second interview, Detective Harrow later recalled, when she asked Nadia directly whether she had ever met Gregor Stein before that evening. Nadia looked at her. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then she said, "I saw an armed man move toward a person I was hired to protect. I stopped him. That is the whole of what I can tell you." It was not an answer, but the 3 seconds of silence before it said more than Nadia probably intended. Adrian Voss surprised everyone involved by declining to push the investigation further. His legal team was not pleased. The detective was not pleased. But Voss, in a private meeting with Harrow, a meeting whose notes were kept sealed for 3 years afterward, reportedly said something simple and final on the matter. He told her that Nadia had saved his life. He said that whatever reasons she had for her silence were hers to keep. He said he would not be asking her to give them up. Nadia was cleared of any wrongdoing. Gregor Stein was prosecuted, convicted, and extradited to face additional charges in another country. The official case was closed. But it left a feeling behind. The way a room feels different after someone has just left it, even when you cannot explain why. Nadia resigned from her firm 14 months after the gala. She left no forwarding address. She did not make any public statements. A journalist who tracked down her mother 2 years later found a woman who spoke warmly of her daughter, but shared nothing of use. She said only that Nadia was living somewhere quiet, and that she was well. The blade Gregor Stein had carried that evening was traced back to a weapons cache that was discovered and dismantled in Moldova about 3 months after his arrest. The 14-second phone call from the Minsk relay was never fully explained. Investigators believed the cell that relay had belonged to had disbanded. Others suggested it had simply become harder to find. Detective Harrow retired in 2022 after 30 years of service. She gave a single interview to a journalist, writing about unresolved aspects of high-profile security cases. When the conversation turned to the night at Cresthaven Manor, she put down her cup and thought for a moment before she spoke. "In this work," she said, "you meet people who lie, and people who tell the truth, and people who exist somewhere in between." Nadia Orel was none of those exactly. She paused. She knew that man, not as a stranger. She knew him the way you know someone from a chapter of your life you do not speak about anymore. And in spite of that, whatever the history was, whatever it cost her, she chose to protect someone else. She stepped between a dangerous person and an innocent one, without hesitation. The journalist asked whether she believed Nadia had ever been in danger herself by doing so. The detective considered it. "I think she understood exactly what she was walking into," she said. "And she walked into it anyway." Adrian Voss continued to run his company through the following years, restructuring his personal security arrangements entirely after the gala. He rarely spoke publicly about that evening, but in a speech he gave in the spring of 2023 at a private conference for defense industry leaders, he paused near the end of his remarks and said something that several people in the audience remembered afterward. "There are people in this world," he said, "whose courage you will never be able to fully understand. Not because it is complicated, but because understanding it would require them to give up the only thing protecting them." He did not explain the remark. He moved on to another topic, but those who knew the full story of that October evening understood what he meant. Nadia Orel had walked into a room full of powerful people and, without a word of warning to anyone, had quietly placed herself between a man with a hidden blade and the man he had come there to find. She had stopped it in 11 seconds. She had answered every question with the same composed, careful silence. She had accepted the outcome, left without complaint, and disappeared into an ordinary life in an unknown place. No one ever found out the full truth of what had connected her to Gregor Stein. No one ever learned what was said in that 14-second phone call 6 weeks before the gala. No one ever discovered what chapter of her past she had spent so many careful years closing the door on. What the world was left with was this: a woman had seen something no one else saw. She had acted when no one else moved. She had protected a life at the risk of her own peace. And then she had walked away, quietly and completely, and kept the reason entirely to herself. Some people, when they heard the story, said she must have been hiding something. Others said she must have been protecting something. A few said there was no difference between the two. Detective Harrow, for her part, said only this when asked what she believed about Nadia in the end. "She did a good thing," she said simply. "Whatever came before it, she did a good thing. And I think she knew that would have to be enough."